Hi all, my name's Charlotte Harris and I'm from Team Consulting. And today I'd like to share with you some of our experiences in helping our clients select the right device technology for delivering their new therapies. So my role is Head of Front-End Innovation. That means I help set direction in the early stages of product development. And I work for Team Consulting, a medical device design and development company based in Cambridge in the UK. So what I'd like to talk about today are two things. Firstly, about the importance of having the right device. And then I'm going to walk you through 4 steps to selecting that right device for your therapy. When you're developing a new therapy, the device you develop or select to deliver it will be key to the overall product success. The development effort of a device is tiny in comparison to the huge costs and timescales of a large drug development, but that device has to be the right device for your specific requirements and for your application. Because if that device is wrong, and let's say it doesn't work properly, doesn't function technically, or people can't use it, then the chances of that device successfully delivering your therapy to the patient are severely compromised. So we shouldn't underestimate the importance of the device. So the right device for one company in therapy may be completely different to what's the right device for another. So for one company, it might be the one that gets them to market or clinic quickest. For another, it might be the one with the most superior technical performance. And for another, it might be the one that offers the optimal user experience. We really need to look at each case individually, and in an ideal world, you want a perfect blend of all three, that sweet spot there in the middle in pink. But this really is difficult to achieve when you've got different people on the team with different objectives, and it's very easy for the project to be pulled off in one direction or another. So when you're obtaining this right delivery device to your therapy, you've got 2 options. The first is to develop your own from scratch, or secondly, you could license an existing or developing technology from somebody else. Now, there may be many good reasons why you want to develop your own device, but if there's something available, either on or near market, that you could license, then a number of pharma companies choose this route because it's potentially less risky, takes less time, and is much less costly than a ground-up development. So this is the route I'm going to focus on today. But how do you decide which of those many technologies are available is the right one for you? So this is where it helps to have an idea of what to do. So now I'm going to walk you through 4 steps, which are align, define, explore and assess, which a pharma company might take to help identify promising technologies for their therapy. So a further more extensive programme of assessment and due diligence is going to need to follow this. But if you follow these initial 4 steps, then you'll be able to identify a short list of suitable technologies for your particular application and help set you on the path to the right delivery device. So the first of these steps is to align your stakeholders from the start. So we believe it's really important to gain consensus and alignment on project goals right from the word go. This just prevents surprises and disagreements later on in the programme. And we found the best way to do this is to hold a strategic workshop right at the start of the project. This workshop should be attended by a diverse mix of stakeholders from across the business, whether that's formulation, clinical, devices or commercial, etc. It's a forum for people to share their own views and also for the group to develop a shared view. And it's an opportunity for all those busy people to get together and work together as a team. It's highly likely that some of the people needed to attend the workshop will be located around the globe. And we found that you can't beat meeting face to face if this is possible. However, the mix of disparate locations with restricted travel due to coronavirus means that in today's world this is much more difficult. However, our experiences, both pre-COVID and over the last 16 months, have shown that a remote workshop using video conferencing and some of the ever-increasing options for remote collaborative tools means we can do the job just as well remotely. So at this workshop, we want to make sure we firstly agree the goals and objectives for the project, for the therapy and for the device. We want to make sure that we're developing a shared vision for what we want to achieve. And we want to make sure we share knowledge between the different skill sets, making sure we understand the aspirations and constraints from each viewpoint. And then we need to make sure we identify knowledge gaps and make a plan for research and how we're going to fill them. And there is one final objective of getting our stakeholder group together, but I'll discuss that more in detail in step 2. So at the end of this first step, we've allowed a diverse mix of stakeholders to share their knowledge and views. And between them, they've agreed objectives and a shared vision. And we've also identified where there are gaps in the group's knowledge and where we need further research to fill them. So everyone is aligned on what happens next. So our second step is to define our requirements for our ideal device. So let's go back to our Venn diagram I showed you a few minutes ago. And remember, we're aiming for that sweet spot solution in the pink there in the middle. So we should make sure we define our device requirements with our diverse stakeholder group from before. Some example requirements in each of these categories could be, from a technical perspective, we're looking for a device to deliver a drug or volume of payload of X in a time of Y. From a commercial angle, maybe we're looking for a market launch no later than 20XX. Or from a user perspective, we're looking for a device suitable for use by patients with conditions X and Y. So together as a group, you're going to need to discuss and argue over and capture these requirements. So it can be useful to have an independent facilitator to help with this. And then this is where it starts to get a little bit more detailed. So once we've captured our list of requirements, it's really helpful to know which ones are a priority. So these are the ones that are essential that we address with the device, and then we need to know which are the more nice to haves. So it's helpful to do this exercise in our workshop with our stakeholder group, so we can ask the participants individually to rank which requirements are most important to them from their perspective. Because then we can collate and collaborate and consolidate the results from the group and discuss if we all agree. So to take things a step further after the workshop, we can define some criteria which we're going to score and assess the device technologies against later on. And we can do this in a number of ways. So one route is to firstly assign a weighting value to each requirement to define its importance. We can then define some ranking scores and ranking criteria to assess the technologies against. This can be quite a detailed process, and we may not need to do it in all cases, but it will help to ensure that the technologies are assessed fairly and equally when we come to it. So by the time we've done this second step, we've gathered technical, commercial and user requirements for a diverse mix of stakeholders, and we've prioritised them. And we've defined how we're going to assess the device technologies against these requirements when we find them. So our third step is easy. This is where it's time to explore the options for our delivery device. So when we're looking at the technology landscape, we should include marketed devices, but also devices that are still in development. Some data sources where we might find some relevant information include perhaps consulting with device experts, attending conferences, perhaps looking in articles and journals and publications, consulting company websites, and maybe having some initial supplier conversations. So we found that as we gather this information, it's really useful to create a spreadsheet. And if we have relevant headings in that spreadsheet, it makes sure that we collect the same information about each of the devices that we find. And we do this for the initial long list of devices that we're considering. In addition to the spreadsheet, we found it really useful to create a pro forma template. And this template is populated with the same relevant information about each of the device technologies, but it makes it really easy for us to summarise the raw data and also really easy to compare and contrast the technologies against each other without having to scroll through a big spreadsheet. So by the end of this third step, we've explored the landscape of possible technologies using a variety of different sources. We've captured the same relevant information about each device, and we've presented that information in a way that's really easy to compare and contrast the technologies against each other. Which brings us to our fourth and final step, which is to assess the technologies against the requirements that we defined in step 2. So if we go back to our scoring and selection matrix that I showed you earlier, I've now added an additional columns on the right for the scoring, where the technologies, called A and B in this case, have been assessed against the criteria and given a weighted score. So we can add up all these weighted scores and get an overall score for each technology. And we can compare these scores as they are, or we might want to map them out in a more visual manner. So I can see here on the left, we've got a couple of example plots. We've got a bar plot on the left and a scatter plot on the right. And these plots allow us to quickly compare the devices and identify which ones best meet our shortlist. So now we have our shortlist, but this process will often highlight that there's rarely a solution available ready to go which meets all of your requirements as it is. So it's likely there'll need to be some trade-offs to discuss, or perhaps modifications to the device that's needed. And so we can assess the likely impact of these early on in the process before we go too far. So by the end of this fourth and final step, we've systematically scored and assessed the technologies against in a fair and equal manner. And we've mapped the results and compared the scores. So from this activity, we've identified a short list of candidate devices. And finally, we've assessed the relative trade-offs and the impact of any modifications that might be needed. But it doesn't end there. The 4 steps I've outlined today will take us through the early part of the device selection process and identify a short list of promising candidate technologies for us. But following this, it's likely that you'll need to do some user research to make sure it meets the needs of end users. There's likely to be design modifications needed, so there'll be a program of development and testing. And there'll be further due diligence required to assess the capabilities of the supplier. And that's not to mention the time required to agree the terms of the deal. But if you remember the 4 steps I've outlined today of align, define, explore and assess, and that it helps to have an idea what you're doing in the early stages of device selection, then you'll be well on your way to selecting the right device for your new therapy. Thanks very much.